Where most podcasts start with, what is the book about? And, why did you write it? I want to go to the moment where you realized that there was a book. What was that moment where you felt like you needed to put all of this into one artifact? And how did you come to this?
That's a great question. Well, um, as your listeners may know, if they heard the previous podcast, I teach hypnosis. I talk about subconscious, and when I wrote my first book, the Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis, over there, um, I had a lot of stories to tell about the subconscious mind. We talked about that in our last podcast, but I didn't tell them because some of them are really strange sounding. When you start talking about angels and demons and God and reincarnation, I didn't want to mix that up with hypnosis, which can be a very simple life tool, medical tool that people misunderstand. So I left out for me the most interesting stories. Um, and I write my books with assistance of a professional writer, Jana Murphy, and she said, yeah, you have to think about your reader, and you should put out your best foot forward. And I said, okay, so this is 10 years ago. I'll tell the stories another time. And so then I was going to write my next book, which is about the subconscious. And the universe brought me to another. So I asked Jana if she would help me write the book, and she couldn't get her head around the ideas of the wild stuff, God and reincarnation and stuff. So I actually went to another co-writer and asked would he be willing, and he was into this kind of stuff, but we didn't click. And I gave it a good half year. I believe that when doors open, just go through and check them out. Sometimes they don't lead to a good place. But anyway, it took us half a year, didn't get very far. For instance, one of the stories I will tell in my now third book, this is the one after the Life Guide for Teens, will be about a young man who saw Hebrew that he had never studied, and I knew what it meant. And he had a lot of gifts. He could talk to animals. He has a couple of reincarnation stories. He has a couple because he had two different souls. It's quite interesting. Um, so I told, and he wants to be a veterinarian. And my other co-writer, who I was working with, why would he want to be a veterinarian? He said, with his gifts, he should be like a human doctor. And I said, oh, you're not the right person because if you have a good understanding of the universe and how things work, you understand there are many different ways to express um, the universal will or God's will, depending on your point of view. So as I was working with him, Jana Murphy says to me, how would you like to write a book about helping teens do know what you do? So that's how the idea came to me. Jana said, I'd like to write this book with you. And I said, wow, a professional writer wants to help me write a particular book. Yeah, let's do it. And that's how I got the idea. It came, my belief is it came from the universal force through Jana, and we work really well together. And so we wrote the Life Guide for Teens, and now we are working together on actually, to me, my most important work, the interviews with the subconscious, because I want to not just tell weird stories, but it really gives you a deep understanding, as we talked about the last time we met, about how the universe works. So that's where the idea came from.
So sticking with the Life Guide for Teens, and we'll make sure we'll get you back on the program for the third book, absolutely. But sticking with the Life Guide for Teens, where did you stop in putting content in the book? So what I mean by that is you have so much to say, you have so much that you think about and write about. Like, how did you figure out exactly what to put in the book? And I guess most importantly, what did you want to put in the book that you actually didn't get to?
Great questions. So, first of all, I don't think you can ever put everything you want into a book or a lecture or as a teaching a class. You can never put everything in. But early in my medical career, I learned that it doesn't really matter. Why? Because, first of all, most people don't remember much of what you tell them. And I told myself that people like who give talks and they want to give every single point, they don't want to miss something in case they miss something important. But what I've learned, if people take from your talk or your book two or three concepts and use them, you're a winner. They're a winner. So when I give a lecture and I write a book, I will highlight these are the things you really want to know. And then I'll say it 2 or 3 different times. And when I get done with the lecture book, these are things you really want to know. And so both Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis and the Life Guide for Teens, you'll notice at the end, here are the top tips that you want to use. Okay, so how do you know when to stop? Um, well, the way we structure this, the Life Guide for Teens, is we talked about what things affect a lot of our teens. And as I work with them all day, every day, I knew that was pretty easy to come up with a list of types of chapter. We discussed uh, how to structure the book. That's also really interesting. One of the things I've learned in book writing is you have to keep your audience in mind. So I know, for example, teens don't like to read, and they're not going to sit down typically and read a whole book. So this book for directed at teens is structured with little snippets of like little tools, half page tools. Read this. Think, does it make sense to me? Use it. In the introduction to the book, I say, you don't have to read the whole book. You don't even have to read the whole chapter. Pick a topic that you like and read what makes sense to you and apply it to your life. I also put in vignettes from other teens, figuring teens like to read about other teens. And we also put in a section for parents, um, basically telling them whatever thing that your teen is dealing with, it's not up to you to solve it, but you want to support your teen. You want to give them the environment in which they can thrive. One of the messages I want parents to understand, this is really important. It's not your job to make your teen happy. It's not your job to make them successful. That's their job. As a parent, your job is to give them the environment in which they can thrive. I actually learned that from a doctor named Foster Cline, Cline. He wrote Love and Logic for Teenagers. And it's a pretty old book, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And today, so many parents freak out when their child is having difficulties. And there's bad things that occur from that freak out. First of all, you get the micromanaging parents. They don't want the child to do badly, so they just tell them what to do. That's not a good way of raising your child because children learn by steps and missteps. And if they don't misstep, they don't learn. Um, and there's even worse breed of parents, the bulldozers. They clear the field from obstacles so the child never faces an obstacle. And then they're surprised the child falls apart when they get to college and face real life. We see the evidence of that in our culture, this cancel culture. You're making me feel unsafe. These are people who don't know how to cope with uncomfortable thoughts or feelings. And to be a fully functional human being, you have to learn how to cope. So that's how the book is structured. Um, and this book actually is quite unique. I have my target audience coming to my office every day. So when I finish a chapter, I let my teens read it. And, hey, what do you think? Does this make sense to you? Do you want to add anything? I had like 50 readers, 50 teen readers went through it. It was really, really helpful. Um, and so it's a joint effort, and a lot of teens made suggestions. Hey, why don't you add this to it? Why don't you add this? I also had some professional colleagues read it as I was going along. So it's really a joint effort. I acknowledge all these people in the acknowledgments. It was like 75 people there. Um, and and again, I stay humble. It's okay. Oh, I didn't put that in the book. Oh, I could have put that in the book, but that's endless. And there's always more lessons the universe gives you. So that's how I figured out. I didn't worry too much. Did I get everything in there? Just as long as I had the important points in there. And then how do you decide when to stop? Well, publishers generally give you a word limit. So the book initially was 78,000 words, and we got it down to 70,000. So you have to work hard to cut away things. And again, I don't get too attached to particular things because there's nothing that important. So you can let some things go and it's okay. So that's how I went about the book.
So going back to what you said about healthy environment and healthy obstacles, what are those? As a parent and maybe as a teen, you need an understanding of what those look like because there's a collaboration effort, or at least there should be, between the teen and the parent. What is a healthy environment that promotes growth without promoting bulldozing for a parent and a teen?
Excellent question. I wish more parents asked that question. So a healthy environment is one that gives a teen plenty of opportunity and encouragement to do things that are helping them grow physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Those are all very important dimensions. And we cover all of those, by the way, in the book. So, for example, for physical, you want to have the child exercising or going outdoors or participating in a team sport if they want. Don't push them, don't force them, but encourage it and model it as a parent for physical environment. My father, for example, hated sports and wouldn't let me participate. He came from the old generation. Sports were looked down on. Not, I'm glad we're beyond that as a society. Mental environment, make sure your teen has appropriate mental stimulation and don't rely on school for that, especially for a child who's very bright or a child who's struggling, because the schools teach the middle. So the bright kids oftentimes become behavioral problems because they're bored to tears. The kid who's having trouble understanding is also a behavior problem oftentimes, or they just sit quietly and nobody knows they're struggling until the grades come out. So as a parent, you're the most attuned to your child's, you should be the most attuned to your child's gifts and make sure you supplement them accordingly. I just recently met an 8-year-old who new patient chose to come in to be interviewed by himself. I give it, that's very unusual for 8-year-olds to come in without their parent. Why are you here? Well, I don't know. It says here you're anxious. Well, I want to do well, but my main problem is anger. What makes you angry? Well, when I'm coding, this 8-year-old says, I get frustrated sometimes, and I get angry, and then when I get angry, my father becomes angry, and he yells at me, and then I scream back at him, and he puts me in my room, and it just devolves. This is a little genius kid, a 8-year-old coding, and coming in by himself is not your average 8-year-old. When I told his mother, who was when we brought her into the room, your child is really smart, and that's major problem that he's not coping well. She said, "What?" She seemed to be oblivious to that. So as a parent, you have to pay attention. So one of the things I tell a parent is if your child seems irrational, don't assume they're irrational. Don't assume they're young. Talk to them. Not when you're angry, not when they're angry. What were you thinking? If parents do that, they'll find out, oh, my child has a reasonable reason for acting the way they do, and then try to solve it. The same, actually, the different parent. This is a 10-year-old. Just this all this week. The child says, "My mother never listens to me." Well, what happens? Well, my younger sister always bugs me, and I tell my mom, and nothing changes. She still bugs me, and I don't know what to do. Oftentimes, she gets angry at her, and the mother says, "Well, um, I talk to his sister whenever he tells me." The sister's all of four. And I said to the mother, well, that doesn't solve the problem. I mean, yes, you have to discipline his sister, but he's still bugging your son. What is he supposed to do? Because he gets mad and it's nothing is solved. And then we had a discussion that the dad was there too. You have to listen to your child, respect the child, and help them solve the problem. If it's not in there, if it's really your issue, parent, you can't expect the 10-year-old brother to discipline and train the 4-year-old sister. Although I did give him some tools. I said, well, you could tell her that if leaves you things alone, you'll play with her later in the day and she'll be motivated to become more, behave better. But I told the parents, you can also use motivational tools directly yourself. So listen to your child. So a child is always angry because his father always yells at him or because the parents don't address the irritants that's not within a child's realm to correct. It's not a surprise. So listen to the children, respect the children, and then things can improve.
Is the book more for teens or for parents, or can it be read as kind of like a collaborational book, first of its kind, something that should be bestowed to both parents and both teens, so the parents can understand where the teens are coming from, and the teens can also understand where the parents are coming from. Teens have a really big problem. Obviously, the rebellious phase is largely known, and everybody's gone through it. But if the teen can understand exactly what's going on in their mind, and that it's just a temporary algorithm that they're running, And if the parent can understand that it's not that they're a bad parent or the teen is a bad teen, it's just, again, a temporary thing right now, then all of those kind of psychosocial problems go away. Is that fair to say?
Most of them do. You're correct. When I wrote the book, I was thinking, well, first of all, I call it Life Guide for Teens because the publishers, again, want your direct audience. I think it's a life guide. Anybody can benefit from the tools there. And some of the people who've read the book have said, yeah, this helps me, adults who've read it. And I've given it now to precocious 8 or 9 year olds who also benefit. But I've seen people read it collaboratively, and I often tell the family, read chapter 13 together. That's about how to communicate with your parents. And you should read it teenager, and you should read it parents, and or read it together. And sometimes that's really been beneficial. I will tell you, I think the rebelliousness of teens, as I've learned it, is not just about the teens, it's about how their parents react. And when I walked families through how to respect each other. So not just the parent respecting the teen, but the teen respecting the parent, and not having the idea is the teen must earn my respect in order for me to respect them. It doesn't work that way. It's just we're all humans, and teaching the family members to really understand how the other one is thinking. And teens are actually quite reasonable for the most part. You have occasional person with biochemical imbalance, both parent and child. And that's a much harder thing. But most people are fine, but they get into bad patterns. So the parent thinks, I know what's best. And if my teen's not doing it, I'm going to tell him or her to do it. And the teen says, I know what's best, and I'm not going to listen to them. And then you get conflict. If instead they come in, let's first understand each other. And then teen, you, as long as you understand your parent, you decide what you want to do. And I counsel parents, let the teen do what they want to do unless it's life threatening. I mean, if they're going to use narcotics or have unprotected sex or drive with their eyes closed, that's an absolute no. That's pretty obvious, but usually it's a much smaller thing. If they want to procrastinate on their homework and understand that'll affect their grades and they choose to do it, you should tell them why it's not a good idea, but let them experience for themselves. And that takes a lot of burden off the parents. Oh, you mean I don't have to make sure my child gets A's? Nope, that's not your responsibility. That's your child's responsibility. So that's helped quite a bit. I see parents of kids who are quite accomplished, like world champions in their sports, and the parent is sweating bullets that the child's not exercising enough. And I said, that's your child's issue. If they don't practice enough when they fall off their perch, they'll learn that way. Much better than if you push them to do it and they still do it, they won't have not have learned. They've learned that when you push them, they achieve, but they don't know they can do it themselves. So the teen rebelliousness is not just teens, it's also about how their parents react to them.
This is more of a psychological question, but why do parents think of their children more as mini versions of themselves rather than many external entities?
Um, well, I don't think all parents think that. I think teens think that. So like my son, when he was struggling in high school, or my daughter, she said, well, nobody gets straight A's anymore. And I said, that's not true. Or, you know, I I worked really hard in high school. What they heard is, I want you to be like me. And I didn't say that. I would say, I worked hard in high school and I did well, or this is what I did. I'm not saying be like me. I'm saying, here's an example of how to do it. But I didn't say it clearly enough, or they weren't willing to hear it, or they needed to shut it down. So they said, you're being, to me, you're being unreasonable. I think there are parents who want, I, I think a lot of parents want their kids, at least the people I work with, to be successful. And if they're successful parents, they say, well, here's a pattern that works. And I think a lot of it might come from anxiety that if you don't do what I've done, you might fail if they've been successful parents. Um, yeah, and the problem is that if you follow your own parents' model, sometimes it leads to a lot of discord because a lot of people have grown up in dysfunctional homes and then they expect the same thing next generation. That's what they get, dysfunctional kids. So, what I stress to families, your job as a parent is again to help your child become the best version of themselves. And that doesn't mean repeating what you did. It means figuring themselves out. I've had kids who, oh, I'm going to medical school because that's what my dad expects me. My dad's a doctor, mom's a doctor. That's a terrible reason to go to such an intense field. You should go if that is meaningful to you. One of the problems is a lot of teens don't know what they want, which is fine. That's normal. And then the parents say, well, go to a profession where you can make a good living. By the way, if you want to make a good living, don't go into medicine. It makes good living, but you could work a lot less hard and a lot less emotional taxing in other fields and make good money if that's your goal. I teach the kids I work with money is not what it is about. It's about doing something that's spiritually aligned with who you are. But a lot of teens don't know who they are. It's a lifelong process. I'm still learning. I'm still learning, and so I would encourage parents, don't tell your teen what to do. You can give them pros and cons and let them choose.
What does it mean to be spiritual as a teen?
Well, I think, let me go back up. But what does it mean to be spiritual? And that to me means being aware there's more to the existence than you, than the you that you're aware of. And the more to existence can be anywhere from nature is really big and I'm a small part of it. The universe is giant and I'm a small speck and I'll only be here for a second. Or, God exists and God tells me what to do. Those are all variations of spirituality. Uh, for a teen, I think you're just sort of figuring things out. When you get to be 12 and 13 is when you realize that there's more to the world than just you, unless you're precocious. And that often leads to anxiety, especially the bright kids, because they realize that I have no idea how to handle this. And so if they're thinking, they might get scared, become scared. And then in my work, I like to teach about the subconscious, the inner self, because when you realize that your inner self has access to information you don't have, that's a spiritual understanding, even if there's no religion attached to it, or even further, you know, ideas behind it, other than there's a part of me that knows more, that's bigger than me. And I think that's humbling and also empowering because maybe I don't know what I'm about, but this part seems to know.
Was there anything that you felt like people continuously disagreed with about your book when they came across this content or when they talked to you about it or when you talked to them about it, you always got pushback on a certain particular topic?
It comes to mind that somebody posted on Goodreads last month that my the illustrations of the book were done by an AI, and it showed my lack of care for my patients, which was such a ridiculous comment because the the drawings were done by Nathan Hansen, who worked really hand in hand, a live artist who did a great job. And I actually ran the couple of drawings to ChatGPT to see. I said, "Is this AI or not?" I said, "No, it's human made." And it talked about how AI art has these tells these illustrations do not have. Um, but so that was a kind of a weird pushback. But in terms of content, um, not routinely. I mean, there's some, like one of the things I talk about is in the chapter about communicating with your teen is using active listening. And the idea is the parent talks and the teen responds, this is what I understood you to say. And oftentimes the parent will say, no, I didn't say that. And then I'll tell the parent, well, say a short sentence. Don't give a whole lecture here. And then they repeat, the teen says what they think, and I tell the parent, what did they say? And then the parent will say, and the teen says, no, I didn't say that, or you're missing the important point. This happens all the time. So one time there was this 10-year-old girl, not quite a teen, who was struggling within a dysfunctional family. And I was online and I told the family this is how you can improve communication. And the father had nothing to do with it. She already knows what I want, right? And she says, yep. And so, well, say what you said. Nope, she's not going to say it. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to model. I said, you're saying she already knows what you want and she agrees with you. And he said, no, that's not what I said. And then he was completely oblivious to he was completely unaware and oblivious to his part in this dysfunction. And he fired me on the spot, which was fine. it would be a very difficult family to work with. That's fortunately pretty rare.
And just to ask, um, is it worth it to write a life guide for parents? Because in that situation, it does feel like we need to understand where parents are coming from. Because teens, the developmental cycle is pretty, I don't want to say general or generalized, but it follows a certain pattern in most cases. Whereas with adults, it's chaos. Is writing a life guide for parents even worth it? Is it even possible?
Well, anything is possible. Is it worth it? Could well be worth it. I think there are things we need to talk about in the modern world that, like Dr. Spock's guide to raising kids from the 1950s, doesn't apply. There's so many different challenges here. I would tell you that I think parents of this generation are afflicted with anxiety because of the same factors that affect our teens, the social media, the desire to be, look like the influencer, an impossible kind of task, and feeling so bad about when you make a mistake and being worried about being canceled by saying the wrong word. These are real worries. I mean, people do get canceled, people do get called out, and it seemed to be acceptable in our society. So parents are very anxious. And this translates into the bulldozer parent we talked about, or the helicopter parent. That's because they're anxious. And I think one of the things that parents need to learn is, we've talked about it already some, is that chill, let your child find their own path. I had one parent, the child was anxious, so he drove her to college and stayed in the parking lot of the college lecture room so he could take her out in case she panicked. That's not a good message. Why? Well, first of all, with anxiety, if you cater to it, it just grows. Second of all, he showed lack of confidence in his daughter because he was there to rescue her in case she needed it. So the same this holds true when people come to see me and the parent starts to talk about the child's history. I say, no, stop, stop. I want to hear from the child. I explain that if the parent tells the history, first of all, they tell it from their point of view, and the child will usually say, yeah, that's right, even if it's not. And secondly, if the parent tells a story, they're implying the child can't tell it, and that's not a good message. And then I say, if the child tells me a story that omits certain things, that's also notable to me as a therapist. It also tells me where they're coming from. And oftentimes the parent doesn't hear. Like parents say, well, I think this child was traumatized when they were 2 years old, and the child doesn't even remember. And that's not the child's reality. The parent may be right, but if it's not the child's reality, the child feels they're not heard, or the child feels that my parent is pathologizing me, stuff like that. So parents need to learn to take a back seat to their teen. When the child's a baby or 5 years old, you tell them what to do. That's how it works. But you got to switch gears as your child becomes a teen, switch from being an enforcer to a supporter. And actually, you switch gears again when your child goes off to university and comes home. They're no longer your child so much, and more. They're still, I guess, they're always your child, but you have to treat them as adults. You can't treat them as an adolescent and tell them what, you know, get mad at them if they don't do what you think is right.
Let's rewind some decades and go back to when you were a teen and you have this book. How would you use it most effectively in the way that you envision?
Well, a few decades ago, um, I would be, I think I'd be curious to read it because I always had interest in psychology as a teenager. Uh, and I'd probably be most interested in the parts about spirituality and death and grief, which we talk about in the latter chapters of the book. The book is structured so the early chapters are more applicable to younger teens, and later chapters are to older teens. Um, I might have shown it to my parents. My parent, like my dad, said, "No sports for you," and I said, "Oh, I didn't agree." And I would want to say, "Hey, look, this famous author says that you need to let me be myself. That's how I'm going to best grow. If sports is bad for me, I'll find out for myself." Although he was wrong in retrospect. May God rest his soul. But I understand where it came from. It came from a different generation where sports were looked down on. You couldn't get very far in certain areas of society if you spend a lot of time in sports. I think sports, by the way, are wonderful because it teaches you leadership skills. It teaches you how to be a teammate. It teaches you how to take care of your body. It teaches you how to be kind to your opponents. There's so many things you can learn from sports. But my dad was oblivious to it. I guess I've had the book, chapter 16, talks about these very points. I say, hey, look at this. Some author says. And my dad, being my dad, would might have scoffed at this author because he disagreed with him. Um, but he was logical. So I think if the book presented logical reasons, he might have thought about it differently. I can tell you, my father grew up in a secular Jewish home in Israel, as did I. And in college, when I got interested in spirituality and religion, I'd call him, and I had evangelical Christian friends who asked me, "Why are you Jewish?" And I had no idea, other than I was born in Israel, but I had no idea. And I liked that my Christian friends were very calm because they sort of felt that God was guiding them, and I didn't have that feeling. But I was missing something. I would call my dad and say, "Why?" I said, "Why am I Jewish?" Or "Where is the spirituality in Judaism?" And my dad answered me, even though he didn't think he was a spiritual man. But I later learned he would go buy books and read about them so you can read them so you can answer my questions. So he was a good dad, and I think if I had challenged him appropriately about sports, he probably would have come around as well.
How do you have conviction in yourself as a teen when so many things are up in the air about these kinds of topics to be able to go to a parent who may be a little hard-headed and may disagree with you or may tell you the author is wrong or just listen to me or don't listen to the things you read and everything? How do you have conviction as a young person and challenge the people that have raised you?
If you're not in therapy, if you're not working with me as a patient or a client, let's say just reading the book, first of all, I would encourage you to get in touch with your inner self, your subconscious, and we have tips on how to do that. Um, just by calming yourself, put the smartphone away, ask yourself a question, let an answer float up, and learn to trust that inner voice. If you really follow it, you'll see it's generally right. So if your inner voice is telling you your parent is wrong, or you do need to do sports, your parents say don't do it. Um, you then have to decide, is this really important for me or not? If it's not important, or and by important, the way you decide if it's important, by the way, is to ask yourself, a half a year from now, a year from now, if I didn't do this, would I be affected? So if you're talking about video games, whether you play them or not, in the long run, it's not a big deal. You can rationalize anything. Oh, I won't have as good hand-eye coordination. But I mean, if you're honest with yourself, there's other ways of developing hand-eye coordination in this example. So ask yourself if it's important. If it's important, let's say you decide sports is good for yourself physically and mentally and emotionally because you've read the book and you've introspected and you're convinced and your parent doesn't want it. Then you have to look at your specific situation. But I go talk to another trusted adult and see if you can what they think, if they can have any influence with your parent. They may not be able to. I was unable to influence the incorrigible father, in which case I would tell the teen if you can't convince your parents rationally, um, you might find more evidence out there or have your teacher talk to them. Then find a way of coping. Calm yourself. There's skills in the book. Stay calm. Not a teen forever. You will grow up. You'll become more independent in just a few years. Fortunately, that's not often the case. But I'm recalling now that in the medical school, I used to work upstate medical university. Um, in the senior year of medical school, there was a professor who gave a 1 credit course. I think they got like 16 credits a semester. He gave a 1 credit course in reading the medical literature. And he gave 20 hours of homework a week, which is crazy amount of homework when you're in the middle of medical school interviewing for your residency, and it's just an impossible task. And the students went to the professor and said, um, this is not reasonable. Please cut down on workload. He said, nope, it's my class. I'll do what I want. They went to another faculty member in the department and he agreed it was too much work. They went together. The professor said, nope, this is what I want. They went to the dean of the medical school and said, this is unreasonable. The dean says, I can't control the faculty member's charge of his own course. And you can sort of predict what happened next. 2/3 of the class cheated because it was a possible task. When that came to light, because somebody complained, the administration of medical school said, "Oh, those are really bad students. They all cheated." In medical school, if you cheat, you're expellable. But this is 2/3 of the senior class. So the school talked to them all, told them how they were bad or how they acted badly, and gave them a makeup assignment or something. I thought the school handled it very poorly. I thought that they should have taken on some of that responsibility. Just like if your child acts out, you should ask yourself why, how could I have helped or how did I contribute? If your students all got Fs, you should ask why. Did I not teach them well, or did I give the schools show no reflection and blame the students? And then the next year, the school was put on probation by the accrediting body relating to this. So I'm telling this story because sometimes the authority figures are unreasonable. Um, I will just tell you that I think sometimes authority figures are unreasonable because to admit they did something wrong is too difficult because maybe they have to change the way they do things, and that's really hard to do. And so I'm not justifying it, I'm just explaining why. Um, so sometimes you have to learn to cope. And 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 I would say to you, if you're a teenager, if I'm working with you, I'd say, well, difficult times you grow from them. Difficult, so just appreciate. I know it's difficult. I know it's frustrating, but when you know how to work with your frustrating parent, you'll be able to work better with a frustrating teacher or boss some days. It's all good. Not all good, but it's okay.
What does it mean to be responsible nowadays and take responsibility and take accountability? You talked about your dislike for cancel culture, and it's much easier for me to say that you gave me a bad grade because you're racist rather than because I performed badly. That's me not taking responsibility for my actions. Where do you think that stems from, and how do we reclaim responsibility?
Great and tough questions. So I just finished an interview on my radio show with a psychologist who says, and I've heard this in other settings too, that when you have a emotional problem, it's not your fault. There's something in your brain circuitry, and if you fix that, then you're fine. So I didn't ask her about it, but I think I've heard that with OCD too. It's not the patient's fault; they have a chemistry problem, and a chemical problem in their brain. Um, my answer, by the way, is you know, your parents might have been terrible to you, and you're stuck with a bad temper because of them or whatever. It's still your issue. I'm not saying it's your fault, but it's yours to handle. How do we reclaim responsibility? I think I think the answer is going to be spiritual. I think um, religions try to embody it that, you need to act right, but religions typically give you like a roadmap. I'm not saying the answer is to go back to religion, although for some people it can work really well. But I think we need to, as a culture, understand what are we doing here? What what are humans here for? And not to the goal isn't to be happy or have a good time or party. That's not the goal. Or to be right or to dominate. The goal is to improve each other, improve the world, I think. So we want to see if we can agree on that. That's the goal. And if that's the goal, then the next question is how do we get there? And taking responsibility, if something is wrong, do something about it if it's within your power. And that's what I teach people. And there's a great video by Jocko Willink from PragerU about taking radical ownership. So if something is wrong, fix it, even if it's not your responsibility. Um, that's the opposite of something is wrong, blame whoever's causing it. Um, Recently, I go to a restaurant every morning. I actually take my patients have meals together sometimes because when I was a student, I remember forever how my professors and teachers would take me out to meals. It was really special. So I do that pretty routinely, and the restaurant has had less. They keep changing the menu, and it's less healthy alternatives. So I wrote a polite letter, email to the guest relations, and I said, "Hey guys, I go to your restaurant. Here's how I think you can improve." And they responded politely, telling me they appreciate their input and they're going to take it into consideration. Whether or not they do, I don't know. But I felt as a customer, even though it's not my responsibility, I want to improve the experience. And it's not just for me. It's not for me. It's for my patients, for other people. So that's an example of, I think, taking responsibility when it's not necessarily your responsibility. So why do we do this? Because we want to live in a civil society where we help each other and are um, supportive of each other. Now I'm hearing voices responding, but society is so unfair, or there's racism, or we have structural problems in our society. Therefore, we need to correct for that. And my answer is we want to be aware of that, but sometimes we build it up so much that people think I need to be rescued. It's like the parent who rescues their child. People don't need to be rescued. People, especially in this country, I mean, and in other countries, I guess, I think America is a great country. I think Canada, I mean, the Western world is a lot of great things about it. And when you focus on the things that are bad, we start raising kids who think everything is bad. And that's not a good message. So start being grateful for whatever country you're in, especially a Western country. I guess some some countries, I don't know, I would say be grateful you're alive, and if you have food, be grateful for that. Be grateful for what you can have, and then ask, how can I contribute to make things better? And that's a spiritual approach to life. And from that, I think, well, like canceling someone is not being kind, right? It's the golden rules. There's two versions of the golden rule. There's the one that says, the original one is, don't do unto others what you don't want done to you. That's the Jewish version. And then Jesus was a good Jew in his lifetime. He's purported to say, do unto others what you want done unto you. And I actually have one more variation of that. And that's for people who are kind, good people, but they forget themselves, be it a parent or a friend. And I'll say, treat yourself like you treat others. That's not for everyone, but I think for some people that's really, really important.
That's a perfect way to end it, Dr. Anbar. Um, where can we find you online?
You can find me at centerpointhypnosis.com. You can learn more about hypnosis. You can learn more about my books. And when the third book comes out in 2 or 3 years, you can find that book as well. That'll be called, the tentative title is Interviews with the Subconscious.
Fantastic. Dr. Ambar, thank you so much for being my friend, and thank you so much for today. Can't wait to host you again.
Thank you so much, Ayush. Have a great day, everyone.